thwart their aims and for that second make their day a sad one. And then, of course, you find that anger, key elements of human relationship begin to fail when anger is being expressed. The other driver is angry, and so he's not really getting communication from me, because I'm driving along and I feel bad. I always feel bad when I do a boneheaded thing on the highway, and I'm like going like this or something, sorry, and they're not receiving that communication. That's not really getting across to them. And they begin to share their anger, and their communication is not really well, it's not really, and also, so they're not really, bonding with me as another fellow human being and fellow traveler to the grave, and how we're all brothers and sisters and all this, and then of course you lose communication, you lose regard for human dignity and worth. I mean, their body language indicates that they don't really think of me in ways that pertain to human dignity. If they could get hands upon me, they would not treat me with dignity and respect. So our experience with human anger has been this kind of a bucket of things, and this business of being able to express anger when it happens in a way that's constructive, in a way that helps, is the challenge of our human social existence. James 1:20 cautions us very carefully. It says, "The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God." And my children can testify to that, is that when I have given way to anger in my life, I apparently channel one of my ancestors who was almost the worst example of human anger. My voice gets shrill, and I get this mean look on my face, and my kids will testify, "Dad, it looks like you wished we were disintegrated, just gone." It's weird how when I really give way to anger, my children just feel unloved, unwanted. And I know that I've had people who were angry at me who dealt with it in an extremely good way, but I've discovered that probably that's not my best channel to have myself on, and avoid it if I can. Because again, the idea is to be angry and to yet remain in human relationship with the other person, and also communicate that there is a way out and a way through the situation, which is painful and difficult. And that's the challenge of a parent with a teenage son or daughter, and they're at odds with one another, and things have been said, is to communicate both your emotional involvement, your investment, how much you care. Usually you're angry because you care, and indicate even displeasure, but keep in mind and keep in the forefront that you're still in relationship, that there is going to be a way through, so that when you say you're grounded for 27 years, you're not really talking about that there's a way through. And so, and workplace, the same thing. If you get at odds with somebody in the workplace, you just can't begin to plot, their downfall. Find some way to deal with them as they have dealt with you. You have to find a way to express your anger, express your displeasure, and yet that honors them as a human being, deals with them as with the dignity that they deserve, and shows a way out. It's by no means very easy. And so when we think about anger, we remember James 1:20 is a good verse. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. Avoid your anger, and keep a rein upon that, because I'm a good example. I'm not at my best when I'm angry. Now the question then, does the anger of God work the righteousness of God? Because many times we ask, well, why should we be faced with a God who's angry with us at all? It's interesting that if you look at how people have looked at this through the ages, there have been people who were quite willing to say, yes, God is very angry with a very great number of people, and you might be included, and watch them be punished, watch the wrath fall upon them. And that would be one group, and then way over here would be people who say, well, that's metaphorical, God is not some of those things. But I've really had to be in a lot of difficult situations, and I know my heart, my conscience, my soul wants to tell people, you're in a difficult spot. This is not punishment. And it's very true, and it's life-affirming, and it's healing when that is heard. What one is missing, if you can't forge kind of a nice path between those two extremes, what you're missing is that the Old Testament, when it talks about the anger of God, let's think about the word it uses for anger. It uses the word face. The Old Testament word for God's anger is his face. So that if it says his fierce anger, it's his fierce face. If it says God's burning anger, it's his burning face. This tells us that when God is showing anger, when there is anger at human ways and human destruction and human bad deed doing, relationship still exists. We generally think of a person's anger as almost being separate from them, okay? Because I had a female relation. There was her, good, pies, cookies, feed you punch, let me play in the yard. And then there was her when she was angry. Okay, we had this one, her, and then her when she was angry. They were absolutely two different things. Okay, the idea, though, that the Old Testament referring to God's anger as his face means that we're encountering him. We're in relationship with him. That there continues to be a movement on God's part to do what we know needs to happen when anger exists in a relationship, to find a way through, to value people in their dignity and their worth. God made us. He made us with human dignity. He made us with intrinsic worth. It is his creation and his idea that human beings are treasured. And when we encounter his anger, that is still in the forefront. That is still found. So that when God is expressing anger, there's still always expressed a way out and a way through the difficult situation. Now, just before we go into the ways out and the way through, we're here in a church. Understand and come to grips with the idea that the anger of God against the human community, against what we are as a people, is a real thing and has to be. It can be a little difficult here because, for the most part, I could look around and I could mention many ways in which we're happy, we're comfortable. Our lives have fallen in pleasant places. I mean, we can read bad news by the wheelbarrow full, but understand that the United States of America is still a great place to live. Okay, almost no matter what happens in it, it's still a wonderful place, and we're in a wonderful place with amazing things that happen in our lives, things that stir us to thankfulness. But consider that in the world there can be young people, children, who are in the grip of selfish and abusive adults, and these young people have no way out. There can be women in the grip of human trafficking, which is bigger now than drug dealing globally, and they're in sexual slavery and seeing numbers of men a night. They have no choice in the matter. They're refugee populations that have no nation to claim them, and just a world community that wishes they disappeared, with no one that they can really trust, that knows that they have their best interest at heart. There are people who live in oppressive countries, nations where the governments have taken away every fundamental human right. These and other instances would illustrate for us why there would be a lot of people who would say, yes, I hope God has anger at the human community. I hope God has an anger about how things are, because things are not the way they should be. And it's just that Christian viewpoint that we live in a fallen world, and that not all of our stuff, not all of the way we construct a society, not all the way in which we ensure help and preservation of rights and property is going to be the way it ought to be. And so people construct and live their lives, but will run up against the displeasure of God because he is actually the one that is right. He's the one that's stirring us to love, compassion, to generosity, to a value them better than ourselves, and we constantly fall short of that. And so we should get used to the idea that there's an anger of God, and we're going to bump up against that. And so what we do when we bump up against that, we can go to the next screen. The text says, gather yourselves, actually what it says, before the appointed time arrives and that day sweeps on like chaff, and not that many of us have seen chaff blow, but I have been near a bank of trees in the ending of autumn, and I've seen a great wind come down over that grove of trees and seen the leaves fly. They've had no choice but to fly. The power of the wind was going to sweep them away, whether they wanted to hang onto the tree or whether they liked where they were on the ground. This is what the prophet is saying. Gather yourselves before. He says before 3 times. Before the appointed time arrives, before the fierce anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath. Zephaniah is saying you're faced with an aspect of God that is coming against the human community that he's preaching to and saying this is not to be avoided. The only choice you actually have is to act before this all begins to happen. Now, one way, though, as I kind of took you to a place where you can say, well, we understand theologically, we understand in the grand scheme of things why there should be the Lord's anger and why there should be places on this globe where people have designed a world and an existence or made a household in such a twisted way that God's anger should be present there. And he's working to confront, to change, to build relationship, and to bring people through that, to bring people through to a place of deliverance and kindness and life. Now, Zephaniah was in a position to make it rather personal to us in an interesting way. Because we use language like things better changed before to talk about difficulties in our own community, difficulties in our culture, things that are going from bad to worse and never getting better. But we always look at it differently than Zephaniah had it in his day. Zephaniah, if you look in the first verse of Zephaniah, in 1:1, it says he preached during the reign of Josiah, king of Judah. He preached during the reign of a righteous king. That's what the history would tell you. Josiah was the one that people said, man, Josiah, oh, he knows the Lord. Oh, Josiah, he's excited about honoring God. Josiah is making sure, King Josiah is making sure we're doing the festivals and the temple worship that brings to mind all the times that God delivered his people, God showed his love to his people, God preserved and helped his people. He wants the story of God's goodness to be told. He had the law and the word of God just published abroad and taught to everybody. Do you realize what a difference it is for him to be preaching where he doesn't talk, yammer, carry on, go on about the guy at the top? But he says instead, actually, it's the people who seem to have a lot of difficulties. They seem to think their money can buy their way out of anything. They seem to be pretty complacent. They don't want to change. They seem to be excited about God, but all of a sudden, that they'll just turn like that and be excited about other gods and other values. He's a man who's saying, things are right up here. It's the people who've gone wrong. Oh, that's different than how you and I have come to talk and come to be. I've been doing that all my life. I'm doing a good job in school. If only that teacher would do it right. I'm growing up fine. Don't look at me, it's all good. But, oh, my parents, they're being my parents again. That. I am a good worker. If only that other group of co-workers weren't out to get me. If only that boss, the worst boss in the world. I'm a good pastor. If only I had a good bishop. Or we're good church people. If only we could get a good pastor. We're good citizens, all in the United States. If only we could get a good. You understand how that goes? Zephaniah would flip that up. It's just a function of the time that he was in, just maybe to realize that when God says the clock ticks, when God says, you're going to have to respond to me in time, in a limited amount of time, there is something that's coming that's going going to bring down your community. He's speaking to everybody. It also says, to make this real, it can't just be, humankind is sometimes bad and needs to deal with the idea that God is good, but human beings have often brought about evil and wickedness in the community, in their lives, sometimes in households, sometimes infecting whole nations. And you have to deal with this before something happens. Because to make our choices real, make our choices meaningful, we deal with God in the midst of time. So it says before. Now I go to the last screen now. He has advice. Not only gather, but he says seek. It's there. You had before the appointed time, before the fierce anger, before the day of the Lord's wrath. Seek the Lord. Seek righteousness. Seek humility. 3 times to seek him. Now, seeking the Lord. It's more than just saying, the pastor was here today and he was very firm on the idea that you should believe that there is a God. Probably 95% of us are there. And that's not much of a point. But that you should seek the Lord. In fact, if you don't believe in him, you should probably start to seek him because that's the way that he is found. And that he says, seek the Lord. Begin to set your focus upon him. To have your heart set on knowing him better, to draw him near, to finding the places where he is leading you on, to see his face in the midst of the events in your life and in the people he sends your way. Oh, seek his righteousness. Seek a way for his word to speak in your conscience, for the things that he shows you to stir you to compassion, for the things that he brings about in your life, and the word that is spoken, read, or preached to you to stir you to set your life in line with his ways. And seek humility. To take the whole thing as a God-guided process. This is a place where God is saying, seek the Lord. And you know what? He's going to be the one that is working in your life to bring you near to him. Seek his righteousness. He's going to be the one that's talking to you. Seek his humility means you're going to be led. Now, I hope that we take that humility to heart, because I hope you also notice that that's awful easy way out for some of these people. Zephaniah chapter 1, he has a long list of some very bad sins. And he just says, gather, seek me, seek my righteousness, seek humility. If that was you and I, we would be a lot firmer. We would be a lot stricter. I know that we would, because my goodness. I know if I think somebody else is wrong, I deal with them in anger sometimes. If you're a young person and you feel that your parents are wrong, you slam the door, don't come out of your room. If it's your spouse, you walk away. But God would say, it's enough that in the time that you're now being called, you gather. Oh, that's a church word. And you seek him. Because God is very firm that he will bring about deliverance and salvation just to people who will turn to him. That we don't bring a righteousness, we don't bring a way of paying back all we've done. We don't bring a way of satisfying him first so as to make him happy so that his love will pour down. His love pours down first. And we have to get on with that program. And he says, perhaps then you'll be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Zephaniah's name, the Lord hides, the Lord treasures. Zephaniah was one, again, in his context, he knew that probably King Josiah, the righteous guy, would die. The community of Israel would fall apart, would be not united, would fall prey to the great empires. It would be very bad and sad and difficult time, and it was. Zephaniah saw it as oncoming and probably not to be stopped, but he knew that God would still have his eye upon his people. And he says, you will be sheltered. There will be